My name's James Harris, and in 2021 I found myself caught in one of the strangest, most twisted nights of my life. While camping out near the edge of Crater Lake National Park, I'd like to tell you this was just a roughing it trip. But the truth is, I decided to try out a new RV I got off my cousin Derek, who's known for selling almost new gear that barely holds together. The RV was old, dented, and probably in worse shape than my beat-up station wagon. But hey, a deal's a deal. I'd been running from my city life, or at least I was trying to convince myself I needed a break from it. A week with nothing but trees, my lopsided camp stove, and a folding chair sounded great on paper. In real life, it was lonely as all hell. The first couple of days, I busied myself with hiking and cooking sad attempts at camp food, which mostly involved canned chili and things I could stab with a stick over the fire. But by the third day, I was beginning to realize why folks don't typically spend much time out here alone. Now, Crater Lake is a beautiful place, but it's isolated. You don't have the crowds of Yosemite or Yellowstone. It's quieter. I spent a lot of time listening to every little crackle and crunch in the trees, figuring it was either a bear or maybe a ranger who'd gotten a whiff of my chili experiments and was ready to fine me for culinary crimes. Then, on the fourth evening, I heard the sound. It was sharp, sudden, like metal scraping against metal. The RV had been creaking and rattling since I got it, but this noise was different. I froze. As I strained to listen, it stopped. I laughed at myself, figured I'd probably just hit my paranoia peak, and turned back to the fire. I threw in another log, settled back, and let the quiet wrap around me. An hour later, I heard it again, but this time it was closer. "Hey, who's there?" I called out, hoping it was maybe just another camper who'd taken a wrong turn. Silence. The fire crackled as I scanned the tree line. There was nothing but shadows. I was about to chalk it up to the forest playing tricks on me when my eye caught a glint of something metallic. The gleam was low to the ground, moving slowly, as if someone was crawling just beyond the reach of the firelight. My throat went dry. I held my breath, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck rise as the figure came into view. It was a man, crawling on his hands and knees. His face was hidden in the dark. He was holding something, dragging it along the ground with a scraping sound that made my teeth clench. I took a step back toward the RV, my hand fumbling for the handle, but the man stopped, raised his head, and grinned. "Evening," he rasped, his voice raw, like he hadn't used it in years. He stood up slowly, unfurling like some creature shaking off the night. His face came into the light, and I could see he had wild, unkempt hair, a scar running across his jaw, and a pair of glasses that looked like they'd been pieced together from scraps of wire. He wore a dark trench coat, its pockets sagging with heavy, uneven bulges. "Lost?" I managed, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel my hand trembling on the RV handle. He tilted his head, that grin stretching wider. "No, not lost, just looking for company." I forced a laugh. "Well, I'm kind of in the middle of my own thing here. You've got a pretty nice setup," he nodded toward the RV, then at the fire. "Real cozy." "Yeah, I like it," I said, trying to sound casual, though every instinct was screaming for me to get inside, lock the door, and drive the hell out of there. The man's gaze shifted down to the fire, then back to me. "Mind if I join you?" His tone wasn't so much a question as a challenge. He took a step closer, and I could see his hands were streaked with grime. My brain scrambled for an excuse, anything to make him leave. "Actually, I was just about to turn in," I said, swallowing. "Long day, you know?" The man's grin faltered, his eyes narrowing. "Oh, sure," he muttered. "Long days. Lots of those around here." He didn't move, just stood there, staring at me with this fixed look, like he was sizing up a piece of meat. Then, without warning, he turned and walked toward the fire. He dropped something from his coat, a small metal object that clinked against the rocks. In the glow of the firelight, I recognized it. A surgical scalpel. The blade glinted as it caught the light. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I yanked open the RV door and scrambled inside, slamming it shut and locking it. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone, but when I looked, no signal. The RV was dark, and I could barely see out the windows. The man was still outside, pacing around, muttering to himself. Then I heard it. The scraping. He was dragging something along the side of the RV, scratching marks into the metal. I whispered a stream of curses under my breath, trying to think. There was a small hunting knife in the drawer by the stove. Not much, but it was something. I grabbed it, gripping it tightly as I crept toward the window. The scraping stopped. Then, a tap at the window. He was there, peering in, his face twisted in that same grin. He leaned close, pressing his nose to the glass, fogging it with his breath. "You can't stay in there forever, Austin," he whispered. I froze. How did he know my name? I don't remember making the decision. 1 second, I was frozen in fear. The next, I was lunging for the RV's driver's seat, jamming the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I threw it into gear and tore out of there without a second thought. I could see him in the side mirror, standing by the fire, watching me drive off. His face was a pale smear in the rear view as he disappeared into the dark. I thought that was it, that I'd made it. But 10 minutes later, as I was driving down the winding forest road, I caught a glimpse of headlights in the mirror. My stomach sank. I sped up, but the car behind me matched my speed, tailing me close enough that I could see the outline of the driver's face. It was him. Come on, I muttered, slamming my foot on the gas. The RV rattled and groaned, barely holding together as I pushed it faster down the road. Ahead, the road split in 2 directions. I didn't have time to think. I veered right, hoping it would throw him off. But his headlights followed, the glare growing closer, brighter. The RV shuddered, the wheel bucking in my hands as I struggled to keep control. The road narrowed, trees closing in on either side, branches scraping against the sides like claws. Then, just as the road took a sharp curve, his car swerved, slamming into the side of the RV with a force that sent me crashing against the door. The RV spun, tires skidding on the gravel, and I fought to keep it from flipping as it lurched to a stop. Silence. My head was ringing, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. I looked up, expecting him to be right there, waiting. But his car had stopped a few feet behind, headlights off, just a dark shadow on the road. For a long, tense moment, neither of us moved. Then his door opened, and he stepped out, silhouetted in the moonlight. He was holding something in his hand, the glint of metal catching the light, a machete, long and dull, nicked along the edge. I didn't have time to think. I flung open the RV door and bolted into the trees, ducking low as I ran, not daring to look back. Branches whipped at my face, the ground uneven and slippery. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps crashing through the underbrush. I pushed myself faster, lungs burning, legs screaming. I stumbled, catching myself against a tree, my fingers digging into the rough bark. Ahead, the trees began to thin, the ground sloping down toward the lake. I risked a glance back and saw him, his silhouette moving between the trees, machete held low. "Austin," he called, his voice echoing through the woods. "Come on out. Let's finish this." I didn't answer. Slipping down the slope toward the water, I could see the faint outline of an old boathouse near the shore, half collapsed and covered in moss. Desperate, I ducked inside, pressing myself against the damp wood, heart hammering as I tried to catch my breath. The footsteps stopped. I strained to listen, every nerve on edge, waiting for him to come crashing in. But there was only silence. Then, a slow creak, the sound of wood groaning as he stepped onto the dock outside. "Thought you'd be tougher," he said, his voice drifting through the walls. "All that running just for me to find you here, like a rat in a trap." I held my breath, gripping the hunting knife so tight it hurt. The door creaked as he pushed it open, and I saw the glint of his machete, the edge slicing through the faint moonlight as he stepped into the boathouse. He took a step forward, and I could see his face in the dim light, twisted with a sick kind of glee. He raised the machete, taking his time, savoring the moment. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I lunged forward, slamming the knife into his side. He let out a grunt, stumbling back, eyes wide with shock. I twisted the blade, pushing deeper, feeling the resistance as he staggered, dropping the machete with a clatter. He slumped to the ground, his hands clutching the wound, blood seeping through his fingers. I stumbled back, gasping, heart racing as I watched him struggle, his breath rattling in his chest. For a long moment he just lay there, eyes glazed, his hand twitching as he reached for the machete, but his strength was gone. With one last shuddering breath, he went still. The light faded from his eyes. I staggered out of the boathouse, the night air cold against my skin, my mind numb as I stumbled back toward the RV. I climbed up the slope, barely aware of the blood smeared on my clothes, my hands shaking as I reached the RV. I climbed in, feeling the coolness of the wheel beneath my fingers as I gripped it tight, steadying myself. I turned the ignition. After a moment's hesitation, the engine roared to life. Relief flooded through me, my mind still racing but anchored by the familiar hum of the engine as I drove away, headlights cutting through the darkness. I tried to process what had just happened. His face, that twisted grin, the way he'd known my name. All of it circled in my mind like some surreal nightmare. But the wound I'd left on him, the blood, it was real. Tangible proof of everything. I was almost out of the forest when I saw something that made my stomach drop. Parked by the side of the road was a dark SUV, its windows tinted, a thick layer of dust caked on the back. Emblazoned on the rear bumper was an old, nearly faded decal, Crater Lake Volunteer Search and Rescue. As I drove past, I glanced back and noticed something else. A pile of clothes. Clothes and personal items scattered in the dirt nearby. I didn't stop. I couldn't. But as I kept driving, I pieced it together. He must have once been part of the search and rescue team. Maybe someone who'd ventured out to help people, until something twisted him. Maybe it was isolation, or maybe he'd just seen too much. Whatever it was, it had left him hunting for company, preying on anyone who got too close to his part of the woods. I finally reached the edge of the forest, the lights of a distant highway flickering like salvation on the horizon. The RV rattled over the gravel road, every bump a reminder that I was still alive. I pushed onward, away from the darkness of Crater Lake, away from the boathouse, the blood-stained ground, and the silence that hung thick and heavy over those trees. As I merged onto the highway, I thought about making a report, about telling someone what had happened. But then I remembered his face. That smile he'd worn when he first approached me, like he'd already anticipated every move I'd make. He knew the forest, knew the ins and outs of every trail and hidden spot. By the time anyone went looking, there'd be nothing left to find. Just an empty boathouse, a pile of clothes, and an unsettling silence that would keep his secrets buried in the dark. The RV rolled on, and with each mile, the forest receded, swallowed by distance and the night. My name is Michael Lopez. I'm 35 years old, and I used to be a park ranger before I shifted to city planning. I've always been the type to keep a level head under pressure, but that weekend in Ocala National Forest changed the way I see the world, and myself forever. It's hard to explain what we encountered without sounding insane, but I'll do my best. This happened in April 2015. My girlfriend, Emma, and two friends, Tyler and Kelly, and I decided to take an RV trip into the heart of Ocala. Emma, 32, has always been an avid nature enthusiast, and she had been itching to show us Alexander Springs, where the water is crystal clear and the trails promise adventure. Tyler, 30, my childhood friend, and Kelly, his girlfriend, were tagging along mostly because they loved camping, though Kelly was more into the safety of RV life than the rugged outdoors. Looking back, I wish I had trusted Kelly's unease from the start. We arrived at our campsite around mid-afternoon on a Friday, excited to leave behind the noise of the city. The RV, which I'd borrowed from my brother, was parked in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. The air smelled fresh, the kind of scent you can only get deep in the woods. We unpacked quickly, tents for Tyler and Kelly, while Emma and I would use the RV. "See? Perfect," Tyler said, slapping me on the back. "We needed this, man. Get the old crew together." Emma was already wandering the edge of the woods with her camera. "The biodiversity here is incredible," she called back, her voice tinged with excitement. "It's so quiet, though." It was quiet, eerily so, Usually you'd hear birds chirping, insects buzzing, something. Instead, the forest felt like it was holding its breath. I chalked it up to being farther out than usual. That first night was uneventful. We built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and told the same dumb stories Tyler and I had been recycling since we were teenagers. Kelly, however, seemed uncomfortable. She kept glancing over her shoulder and leaning closer to Tyler. "What's up?" I asked her. "Nothing," she muttered. It's so dark out here." "It's the woods, Kel," Tyler said with a grin. "It's supposed to be dark." We laughed it off and went to bed. I didn't know it then, but the forest had already started watching us. The next morning, Emma convinced us to hike a nearby trail. She was thrilled to explore, and I figured it'd be good to stretch our legs. Kelly was reluctant, but joined anyway. We hadn't gone far when Emma froze. She pointed at the ground, a single footprint, barefoot and large. But it wasn't just big. The toes were elongated, tipped with what looked like claw marks. "Bear?" Tyler guessed. "No," Emma said, crouching. "Bears don't leave prints like this." Kelly took a step back. "Let's just go back. This feels wrong." "Relax," Tyler said, brushing it off. "It's probably some weird hiker. People are strange out here." Emma shot me a glance, her brows knitted. I nodded for her to keep walking. The hike became more unsettling the farther we went. The quieter the woods got, the more the occasional snapping of twigs sounded deliberate, like something was following us. Kelly kept muttering that she wanted to turn around, and even Tyler's usual cockiness began to falter. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. By the time we got back to camp, everyone was tense. We decided to stick close to the RV for the evening. As I gathered firewood near the edge of the clearing, I heard Emma calling my name. "Michael!" It was distant, coming from deeper in the woods. I frowned. Emma had been by the fire a minute ago. "Michael, come here!" The voice was louder now, insistent. My gut told me something was off, but curiosity won out. I stepped into the tree line. "Emma?" I called. The voice stopped. I turned back toward camp and nearly collided with Emma herself. "Where were you going?" she asked, breathless. "I heard you," I said, shaken. "You were calling me." Her face went pale. I didn't say anything. That night, things got worse. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of movement outside the RV, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching the pine needles. I nudged Emma awake and whispered for her to stay quiet. Peering through the curtain, I spotted a figure near the fire pit. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, and its posture was bent as though it had been broken and pieced back together. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out, heart hammering. "Who's there?" I barked. The figure turned to look at me, and I swear it smiled. Not a friendly smile, but a wide, unnatural grin that made my stomach churn. Before I could react, it darted into the woods with an animalistic speed, leaving no trace. The next morning, we found deep claw marks on the side of the RV and the smoldering remains of our firewood scattered around. Tyler laughed nervously. "Okay, so someone's messing with us." "Someone," Emma shot back. "You think a person did that?" "It's probably a prank," Tyler insisted. "Locals messing with tourists." Kelly wasn't convinced. "This isn't normal, Tyler. That thing last night wasn't human." Emma spoke up. "There's a Navajo legend about skinwalkers, shapeshifters that take the form of animals or people to deceive you. They can mimic voices, even faces." "This isn't the Southwest," Tyler scoffed. "That's a desert legend." "Legends travel," Emma snapped. "And whatever it is, it's here." The argument spiraled until I stepped in. "Enough, we're leaving. Pack up and let's go." As we scrambled to break camp, the forest closed in. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional crack of branches far too close for comfort. Kelly stayed by the RV, clutching her arms as if shielding herself from something unseen. Then we heard it. Tyler's voice calling from the woods. "Guys, I found something. Come check it out." We froze. Tyler was right next to me, his face draining of color. "Stay here," I said, grabbing a flashlight and stepping into the trees. Tyler followed, despite my protests. The deeper we went, the darker it became. Then we saw it, a figure standing between the pines, its back to us. It looked just like Tyler. "Hey," shouted. The figure turned, its face, a twisted, grotesque mockery of Tyler's features. Its eyes were too large, its mouth stretched too wide. Before we could react, it let out a guttural, inhuman screech and charged. We bolted back to camp, adrenaline pumping. "We're leaving now!" I shouted. Everyone piled into the RV as I started the engine. The tires spun in the loose dirt before catching, and we sped down the forest road. But the thing didn't stop. It ran alongside us, its limbs moving in unnatural jerks. Its mouth formed words that weren't quite right. "James!" it mimicked, its voice distorted. "Don't leave!" Emma screamed as it slammed against the side of the RV, claws screeching against the metal. Tyler grabbed a hatchet from the supplies and swung wildly at the window, shattering the glass and forcing the creature to fall back. We didn't stop until we reached a ranger station at the edge of the forest, shaking and covered in scratches from the shattered glass. The ranger took one look at us. "Around Alexander Springs?" he asked. We nodded. He sighed. "You're lucky you made it out." We never talked about that trip again. Tyler and I drifted apart after that, and Kelly refused to camp ever again. Emma became obsessed with the legends, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. As for me, I haven't set foot in the woods since. Some places are wild not because of the animals or terrain, but because something else lives there. Something that watches, waits, and hungers. My name is Robert Gonzalez, and this story is from a year that feels like a lifetime ago. I was born and raised in the small town of Wellesley, Massachusetts. Not much happens here, which is why what I'm about to tell you is even more bizarre. It started innocuously enough. I was fresh out of college, back in my hometown, working a dead-end job at the local hardware store. Not exactly the life I'd envisioned, but hey, it paid the bills. My girlfriend, Lacey, had just moved in with me. We were both trying to save up for something better, but at least we had each other. One evening, my buddy Owen called. "Zachary, you up for a camping trip this weekend? Just the guys, like old times." Owen always had a knack for pulling me out of my funk. "Sure, why not?" I replied, figuring a weekend in the woods might clear my head. Friday rolled around and we packed up Owen's beat-up truck with all the essentials: tents, sleeping bags, food, and a decent stash of beer. It was me, Owen, Kyle, and Benny. We headed out to a spot in the Berkshires, a place we'd camped a few times before. It was remote, quiet, and far from the hassles of daily life. We got there just before dusk, set up camp, and lit a fire. The night was filled with laughter and stories. It was like we were kids again, with no responsibilities, no worries. Around midnight, I decided to hit the sack. The others were still up, talking and joking. As I crawled into my sleeping bag, their voices faded into the background, mingling with the sounds of the forest. I woke up to silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. I checked my watch. 3 a.m. I sat up and noticed that Owen, Kyle, and Benny were all fast asleep. Stepping out of the tent to stretch my legs and take a leak, I saw the moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the campsite. As I stood there, I heard a rustling noise in the trees. Probably a deer or some other animal, I thought. But then I saw it, a shadowy figure moving among the trees. It was tall, hunched over, and moving with an unsettling grace. My first thought was that it was a bear, but something about its shape was all wrong. "Hey, who's there?" I called out, my voice breaking the silence. The figure stopped, turned toward me, and then vanished into the darkness. My heart was racing, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I finished up and went back to the tent, though sleep didn't come easy. The next morning I told the guys what I'd seen. Owen laughed it off. "Man, you probably had one too many beers. Nothing out here but us and the wildlife." The others agreed, and we went about our day, hiking and exploring the area. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, things took a turn for the worse. We were sitting around the fire again, talking about old times, when we heard a blood-curdling scream. It sounded like a woman, but there was something primal about it, something that chilled me to the bone. "What the hell was that?" Kyle asked, his face pale. Benny, always the joker, tried to lighten the mood. Maybe it's Bigfoot. Or worse, Kyle's ex-girlfriend. We laughed nervously, but the tension was palpable. We decided to check it out, grabbing flashlights and heading in the direction of the scream. The woods were dense, and the beams of our flashlights barely penetrated the darkness. After about 10 minutes, we came across a small clearing. In the middle of it was a deer, or what was left of one. It had been torn apart, its insides strewn across the grass. "Oh my God," Benny whispered. "What could have done this?" Kyle asked. "Mountain lion, maybe?" Owen suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. We heard another rustle in the trees, and all our flashlights swung toward the sound. The figure was back. Standing at the edge of the clearing, it was taller than I'd realized, easily 7 feet, with long, matted hair and glowing eyes that reflected the light from our flashlights. "Run!" I shouted. We bolted back toward the campsite. The creature let out a low, guttural sound that made my blood run cold. We didn't stop until we were back at the fire, panting and wide-eyed. "We need to get out of here," I said, trying to catch my breath. "Agreed," Owen said. "Let's pack up and leave, now." We scrambled to gather our things, tossing them haphazardly into the truck. The forest around us seemed to close in, the shadows growing deeper and more oppressive. Just as we were about to get in the truck, Benny screamed. We turned to see the creature standing at the edge of the campsite, its eyes locked onto us. Without thinking, I grabbed the hatchet from my pack and hurled it at the creature. It let out a roar and retreated into the woods. "Drive!" I yelled. Owen didn't need to be told twice. We sped down the dirt road, the truck bouncing over the rough terrain. The moonlight flickered through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the windshield. We drove for what felt like hours until we reached a small town. Finding a diner that was still open, we stumbled inside, disheveled and shaken. The waitress, an older woman with a kind face, looked at us with concern. "You boys look like you've seen a ghost," she said, pouring us coffee. "Something like that," I muttered. We told her a sanitized version of what had happened, just enough to explain why we were so rattled. She listened, nodding occasionally. "You know, there are old legends about these woods," she said. "Stories of creatures that aren't quite human. Most folks dismiss them as just that, stories. But you never know." We spent the rest of the night in a cheap motel, too afraid to sleep. The next morning, we drove back to Wellesley in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. We never spoke about that night again. Not really. It was like an unspoken pact, a way to keep the fear at bay. Lacey noticed the change in me right away. "Zachary, what happened out there?" she asked one night as we lay in bed. "Nothing," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a weird trip. I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. None of us were. Owen moved to another state a few months later, saying he needed a fresh start. Kyle and Benny drifted away, their laughter and jokes now tinged with an edge of unease. As for me, I stayed in Wellesley, but I never went camping again. I sold my gear, got a new job, and tried to put that night behind me. But sometimes late at night, I still hear that scream, and I wonder what it was we saw out there in the woods. Life went on, as it does, but the shadows of that night never entirely left me. Years later, Owen called me out of the blue. "Zachary, we need to talk." We met at a bar halfway between our towns. He looked older, more worn. We ordered beers and sat in silence for a while. "I can't stop thinking about it," Owen finally said. "That night, I've tried to move on, but it's always there, like a shadow." "Same here," I admitted. As the years passed, the memory faded but never disappeared, and maybe it never will. I grew old, watching my children grow up and start families of their own. I told them stories about my youth, but I never mentioned that night in the bunkers. Then one evening, my son Max, now a grown man with a family of his own, came to visit. We sat on the porch watching the sunset, and he turned to me with a serious expression. "Dad, do you remember that camping trip you went on years ago? The one you never talk about?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Yeah, I remember." Max nodded. "I've been doing some research. There are stories about those woods, stories that go back centuries. People talk about seeing things, hearing screams. I think you saw something real, something that shouldn't be there." I looked at him, my heart heavy with the weight of old fears. Maybe, but there's no point in dwelling on it. We survived, and that's what matters. Max nodded, but I could see the curiosity and determination in his eyes. I just wanted you to know that I believe you, Dad. Whatever it was, you're not alone. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard, I felt a sense of peace for the first time in years. Maybe the past would never fully let go, but I had my family, and that was enough. Life is full of mysteries, some better left unexplored. I don't have all the answers, and maybe I never will, but I've learned to live with the shadows, to find light in the moments that matter. And that's enough for me. My name is David Black, and I'm 44 years old. This happened in late December during a weekend camping trip to Falling Waters State Park in Florida. I was there with my wife Linda, our 10-year-old daughter Sarah, and our 7-year-old son Joey. What started as an ordinary family trip turned into something I'll never forget, though sometimes I wish I could. We had planned the trip as a way to disconnect from screens and reconnect as a family. I wanted to teach my kids a bit about survival skills, maybe show them how to start a fire or identify edible plants. Linda was on board, even though she had her reservations about the old RV I insisted on driving. It had its quirks, flickering lights and an engine that sometimes took a few tries to start, but I was confident it would get us through. When we arrived at Falling Waters State Park, the sun was just beginning to set. The golden light filtered through the tall pine trees, and the sound of distant birdsong filled the air. The kids were already squabbling over who got which bunk bed in the RV, and Linda sighed as she unpacked a cooler full of sandwiches and snacks. "This is going to be good for us," I said, giving her a reassuring smile. "Fresh air, family bonding, it's what we need." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on the dense woods surrounding our campsite. "Sure, as long as nothing breaks down." That evening, we gathered around a small fire I built. Joey poked at the flames with a stick, and Sarah was off to the side, scribbling in a notebook she had brought along for stories. She had a vivid imagination, always making up tales about fairies and witches. Linda read a book, her face illuminated by the warm glow of the firelight. "What are you writing about, kiddo?" I asked Sarah. She looked up and smiled. "A friend I met today." My heart sank for a moment, thinking she might have wandered off and spoken to a stranger. "What friend?" "Ellie," she said matter-of-factly. "She lives by the waterfall." I exchanged a glance with Linda. "You didn't go off alone, did you?" Sarah shook her head. "No, I didn't meet her in person. She just started talking to me when we got here." Linda frowned. "Honey, it's okay to have an imaginary friend, but don't scare your dad like that." Sarah's expression darkened. "She's not imaginary." I didn't push it. Kids have wild imaginations, and I figured it was just part of her storytelling hobby. The first truly strange thing happened later that night. I was outside stoking the fire one last time before bed when I heard it, faint laughter coming from the woods. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. I stood still, straining to hear over the crackle of the fire. "Kids?" I called, but they were already inside the RV with Linda. The laughter faded, and I told myself it was probably another camper. Still, it put me on edge. The next morning, Linda complained about a cold draft in the RV. "It's like someone left the door open," she said, pulling her cardigan tighter. I checked the door and the windows. Everything was locked up tight. We spent the day hiking to the park's main attraction, the waterfall. Sarah was unusually quiet, lagging behind and glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to appear. Joey, on the other hand, was full of energy, running ahead and shouting, "Come on, slowpokes!" The trail led us to the waterfall, a beautiful cascade of water tumbling into a deep sinkhole. As we admired the view, Sarah tugged on my sleeve. "Ellie says this is where it happened," she whispered. "Where what happened?" I asked, my voice low. Sarah didn't answer. She just stared at the water. That night, the strangeness grew worse. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of faint knocking on the RV door. My first thought was that it was Joey playing a prank, but when I checked, both kids were asleep in their bunks. The knocking came again, this time from the back of the RV. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, my breath fogging in the cold night air. There were no footprints, no sign of anyone around, except for a single pair of child-sized muddy prints leading toward the woods. The next morning, Sarah seemed withdrawn, and Joey complained about bad dreams. Linda pulled me aside. "Something's not right here, Grayson," she said. "The kids aren't acting like themselves." I didn't want to admit it, but I felt it too, a heaviness in the air, a sense that we weren't alone. By the third day, things reached a breaking point. Sarah began talking to Ellie out loud, carrying on conversations as if the girl was standing right beside her. When Linda tried to intervene, Sarah shouted, "You're scaring her. She doesn't like it when you yell." That night I woke to the sound of the RV door creaking open. Sarah was gone. Panic surged through me as I grabbed a flashlight and followed her tiny footprints into the woods. I found her standing by the waterfall, her arms outstretched as if reaching for something. A faint figure stood in front of her, a young girl soaking wet, her hair hanging in tangled strands over her pale face. "Sarah!" I shouted. The figure turned toward me, and I froze. Her eyes were hollow black pits, and her mouth twisted into a scream that echoed through the woods. Linda arrived moments later, clutching Joey's hand. Together we pulled Sarah away from the water. The ghost didn't follow, but her presence lingered, oppressive and cold. Back in the RV, we tried to make sense of what was happening. Sarah, still dazed, murmured, "She's so lonely. She just wants someone to stay with her." I remembered the muddy footprints, the laughter, the feeling of being watched. "She's dangerous," I said. "We need to leave now." But the RV wouldn't start. The lights flickered, and the air grew colder. A loud bang came from the roof, followed by the sound of scraping metal. Linda clutched my arm. "What does she want?" "She wants Sarah," I said, my voice trembling. Linda suggested offering Ellie something to appease her. Sarah hesitated, then handed over a doll she'd brought along. "Ellie can have this," she said, "so she won't be lonely anymore." We left the doll at the base of the waterfall, whispering a prayer for Ellie to find peace. For a moment, the woods fell silent, and I thought it was over. As we drove away, the RV finally roaring to life, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw Ellie standing at the edge of the woods, clutching the doll. Then she was gone. The kids were quieter on the ride home, and Linda seemed lost in thought. We didn't talk about what happened, not right away, but every now and then I catch Sarah staring out the window as if listening to someone I can't hear. And sometimes, when the house is quiet at night, I hear faint laughter just beyond the edge of the light. I've always liked the quiet of the road. No one asking questions, no one poking into your business, just miles of highway, the hum of the engine, and the occasional crackle of a distant voice on the CB. But that night, somewhere on Route 50 in the middle of Nevada, the silence felt different. Too quiet, too heavy. It had been days since I'd had a decent break. I'd left San Francisco with a load of building materials, bound for Kansas City, figuring Route 50 would cut the travel time. They call it the loneliest road in America, and I've driven it enough times to know why. For hours at a time, you don't see a soul, just endless desert dotted with mountains that never seem to get any closer. I was more tired than I wanted to admit, the kind of tired that sneaks up on you, where your eyelids grow heavy and the lines on the road start to blur. Normally I'd push through, but something told me to pull over this time. I glanced at the clock and decided to hit the next rest stop I saw. A quick nap, I told myself, and I'd be good as new. I felt a wave of relief when I spotted the weathered sign for a rest stop 2 miles ahead. The stop wasn't marked on my map, which was odd, but these old highways have plenty of places that don't show up anymore. The place looked like it hadn't seen a decent coat of paint in a decade. The lights above the parking area flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. A beat-up picnic table and a few rusted trash bins were all that marked the stop. The restroom building sat off to the side, its windows dark, and the air around it felt heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I pulled the rig into the lot and killed the engine. Silence settled in around me, pressing through the windows. I leaned back in the driver's seat, rubbing my face. I just needed a few hours of sleep and I'd be good to go. But before I could settle in, nature called. Typical. With a sigh, I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the cab. The night air was cold, much colder than I'd expected for Nevada, and the wind carried a strange scent, dry, with an underlying hint of something rotten. I wrinkled my nose but kept moving toward the restroom. The building was worse up close. Graffiti covered the exterior, but it wasn't the usual stuff, no names or crude drawings. These were symbols, spirals, triangles, strange geometric shapes I couldn't quite place. Some of them were carved deep into the wood, like they'd been there a long time. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me harder inside, stronger than before. I flicked the light on, but the bulb overhead just buzzed and flickered weakly. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the room. The place was empty, as I expected, but the walls were covered in more of those symbols, dozens of them, carved into the tiles, drawn on the mirrors. I did my business quickly, trying to ignore the feeling that those symbols were watching me, and made my way back out to the parking lot. That's when I saw the first figure. It was standing just beyond the reach of the flickering lights, a man in a heavy coat, his back to me, staring out into the desert. For a second, I considered calling out to him, but something about the way he stood there, so still, so quiet, made my gut twist. I stopped in my tracks, trying to decide if I should just get back in the truck and go. But the man didn't move. He didn't even seem to notice I was there. Maybe he was just another trucker, but I hadn't seen another rig on the road in hours. I took a step back toward my truck, keeping an eye on the figure. When I reached for the door handle, my fingers brushed something cold, too cold. I pulled my hand back, confused, and shone the flashlight on the handle. Symbols. Those same spirals and triangles scratched into the metal of my door. My heart started racing. I hadn't seen them there before. I would have noticed. I swallowed hard, scanning the lot, but the figure was gone, just vanished. I fumbled with the door, pulling it open and climbing back into the cab as fast as I could. I locked the doors and sat there, trying to steady my breathing, trying to shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I'd driven across the country dozens of times, stopped in every kind of rundown, creepy rest stop imaginable, but nothing like this. The radio crackled to life suddenly, nearly making me jump out of my skin. For a second I thought it was just picking up static, but then a voice broke through, low, distorted. Frank. My heart skipped a beat. I snatched the CB mic. Who is this? Silence. I stared at the radio, waiting, but the voice didn't come back. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But the sound of my name, it was too clear. I glanced out the window again, half expecting to see the man in the coat, but the lot was empty. The only movement was the weak flicker of the overhead lights. Still, that rotten smell lingered, hanging in the air like a warning. I was about to start the engine and get the hell out of there when I noticed something in the rearview mirror. There was another figure now, standing near the restrooms. This one was closer. I couldn't make out their face in the dim light, but they were staring right at me, not moving, not blinking, just watching. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but when I reached for the ignition, the engine sputtered and died before it could even turn over. I tried again, nothing. The lights on the dashboard flickered weakly before going out altogether. Come on, I muttered, trying to stay calm. Don't do this to me now. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal, no bars, no nothing. The figure was still there, closer now. Another figure appeared near the picnic table, and then another by the trash bins. They didn't approach, but they were closing in, little by little. My mouth was dry. I fumbled for the flashlight and shone it toward the restroom, hoping to get a better look at the figures. The beam of light cut through the dark, but when it hit the first figure, they were gone. Just gone. I swept the light across the lot, but all the figures had disappeared. Every single one. I didn't waste any more time. If my truck wasn't going to start, I'd fix it in the morning. For now, I just needed to get out. Out of here, on foot if I had to. I grabbed the toolbox from under the seat just in case and jumped down from the cab. That's when I noticed something else on the side of my truck. Etched into the paint was one of those symbols. Fresh. I could smell the metallic tang of scratched metal. It was the same spirals and triangles I'd seen in the bathroom, the same ones that had been on the door handle. The smell hit me again, stronger now. I turned, shining the flashlight toward the restroom, and that's when I saw it. The symbols were glowing. A faint, sickly light pulsed from the walls of the building. The carvings and scratches now alive with some kind of energy. The ground beneath my feet vibrated, a low hum building in my chest. I stumbled back toward the truck, my flashlight shaking in my grip, but the lights in the building grew brighter, casting long, flickering shadows across the lot. And then I heard the voice again. Frank. I whipped around, scanning the empty lot, but there was no one there. No figures, no man in the coat, just the voice, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Frank, you need to stay. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept moving, trying to get back into the cab. But the symbols, they were on my truck now, glowing with the same eerie light. The handle felt like ice under my fingers. The wind picked up, howling across the lot, carrying whispers with it. Low, urgent voices layered on top of each other, impossible to understand, but they felt old, ancient. I was frozen in place, trapped between the truck and whatever the hell was happening in that restroom. The lights, the symbols, the voices, I didn't know what to make of any of it, but I knew one thing: I had to leave now. The truck groaned as I climbed back into the cab, and I turned the key one last time, praying it would start. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life. Without another thought, I slammed the truck into gear and floored it out of the lot, the tires skidding on the cracked asphalt. The rest stop disappeared in the rearview mirror, the glowing lights and symbols fading into the distance. As I drove down the highway, my hands trembling on the wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped. The silence of the road was back, but it wasn't the same. The weight of those symbols, the voice, it lingered, and I knew deep down that whatever was tied to that rest stop wasn't finished with me. I don't stop on Route 50 anymore, not after that night. Some places are better left in the past. I had been driving for hours, the Mojave Desert stretching endlessly around me, barren and vast under the relentless sun. The road was long behind me now, just an empty trail of dust leading out to nowhere. Perfect. This was exactly what I needed. A break from work, from the grind, from people. Out here, there was nothing but silence and space. No cell towers, no deadlines, no distractions. Just me and the desert. I pulled the RV to a stop near a rocky outcrop and stepped out. The air was dry and still, the kind of quiet that felt like it was pressing down on you. I took a deep breath, inhaling the warm scent of sand and stone. This was my escape. No buzzing phone, no frantic emails, just the open sky and the endless horizon. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV in the shade of the rock formation and pulling out my gear. I wanted to explore before the light faded. There was something about the desert that always fascinated me, the way the landscape shifted from harsh to beautiful in a matter of hours. But right now I was focused on one thing: silence. After weeks of being glued to my phone and running from meeting to meeting, the thought of being completely disconnected was a relief. No cell reception out here, no GPS signal, just me and the land. As I unpacked, I heard it, a faint sound, almost too soft to notice. A rhythmic beeping. At first, I thought it was something inside the RV, maybe an alarm or a piece of equipment malfunctioning. But after a quick check of my gear, everything seemed fine. The sound persisted, though, steady and faint like a pulse just beneath the surface. I stepped outside, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the desert was quiet. The only sound was the faint wind rustling through the rocks. I brushed it off, assuming it was some distant echo of the RV's systems, and finished setting up camp. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, I felt that familiar sense of calm wash over me. This was why I came here, to escape, to let my mind breathe. But that night, the beeping came back. I was sitting by the campfire, watching the flames flicker against the darkening sky, when the sound returned, clearer this time. It was still faint, but persistent. A soft, rhythmic pulse, like something distant calling out. I stood, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I wasn't the type to get spooked easily. Logic and reason were my tools, and they had served me well in the world of engineering. But there was something about the sound, something that felt wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped away from the fire into the darkness. The desert stretched out before me, vast and empty. I started walking, following the faint sound. The rhythmic pulse grew louder as I moved away from the RV. For a while I saw nothing but sand and rock. The beeping seemed to fade, then grow louder again, like it was moving with me, always just out of reach. I kept walking, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the night. But every time I thought I was getting closer, the sound slipped away. Finally, I stopped. My pulse was racing now, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The beeping had faded again, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the desert. The silence around me was heavy, almost suffocating. I turned back toward the RV. The fire still glowed faintly in the distance as I walked. The beeping returned, faint but steady, like a distant heartbeat. The next morning, the sound was gone. The desert was still quiet, as if nothing had happened. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Isolation could do that. The vast emptiness of the desert, the absence of any familiar sounds, it could mess with your head. I decided to hike further out, hoping to clear my mind. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, the sun already beating down on the sand. I grabbed my gear, making sure I had plenty of water, and started walking toward a rocky ridge I had spotted in the distance. Halfway there, I saw him. A man walking toward me from the opposite direction, his figure small against the endless desert. I hadn't expected to see anyone out here. This was a remote area, far off the beaten path. As the figure grew closer, I could make out an older man, his clothes worn and dusty, his face lined and weathered from the sun. "Hey!" I called out, raising a hand as we approached each other. The man nodded, his eyes distant, almost vacant. "You camping out here alone?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, just me," I said, a little taken aback by his bluntness. "I've been walking for days," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You heard it yet? The signal?" I blinked, unsure if I had heard him right. "The signal?" He nodded, his expression grim. "You'll hear it. Once you hear it, you can't get it out of your head. I've been following it for days. It doesn't stop." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" The man glanced around nervously, as if the desert itself was listening. "There's something out here. Something that's been broadcasting for years. It gets inside your head, starts with the beeping, then it gets louder. You'll see." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. He looked dehydrated, sunburned, like he'd been wandering the desert for days without rest. I offered him some water, but he shook his head and started walking again, heading back the way he came without another word. I stood there, watching him disappear into the distance, his words echoing in my mind. "Once you hear it, it doesn't stop." That night, the beeping was louder. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The sound pulsed through the silence, steady and rhythmic, like it was coming from somewhere deep beneath the earth. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the sound was there, burrowing into my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, GPS, water, and set out into the desert. I had to find the source. I had to know what was causing the sound. The desert was pitch black, the sky filled with stars. My flashlight cut through the darkness, the beam dancing across the rocks and sand as I followed the beeping. It was louder now, almost frantic, like it was pulling me towards something. The GPS was acting strange, flickering in and out, as if the signal was being disrupted. But I kept moving, my footsteps crunching in the sand. The beeping grew louder with every step. After what felt like hours, I saw it. A structure, half buried in the sand. A bunker or a weather station, long abandoned. The beeping was deafening now, emanating from somewhere inside. I hesitated, standing at the entrance of the bunker. The door was ajar, rusted and creaking in the wind. Everything in me screamed to turn back, to leave and forget about the sound. But I couldn't. The signal was pulling me in. I stepped inside. The air in the bunker was stale, suffocating. My flashlight flickered as I moved through the narrow corridor, the walls lined with rusted equipment and old faded maps. The beeping was louder now, echoing through the metal walls, vibrating in my chest. At the end of the corridor, I found a small room. In the center, there was an old radio tower, its equipment still faintly powered by some unknown source. But that wasn't what caught my attention. On the walls were symbols, strange, intricate markings that looked like they had been carved into the metal. They spiraled outward, converging on the radio tower as if they were feeding into it. In the corner of the room, I found a journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle. The entries were short, scrawled in frantic handwriting. They talked about the signal, how it started with the beeping, how it got louder, how it never stopped. "It gets inside your head," one entry read. "It's not just a sound, it's alive." As I read, the beeping shifted, turning into a high-pitched screech that pierced through my skull. I dropped the journal, clutching my head as the sound rattled through my brain. It wasn't just a signal. It was something more, something that had been waiting, broadcasting, pulling people in. I had to get out. I stumbled out of the bunker, the sound still ringing in my ears. The desert spun around me. I ran, my legs weak, my mind spinning. The landscape warped, the rocks and sand shifting as if the desert itself was alive, moving with the signal. When I finally made it back to the RV, I collapsed inside, my head pounding. The beeping was now a constant, dull hum in the back of my mind. I left the desert the next morning, driving as fast as I could. The beeping was still faint but persistent. I didn't look back. Even now, days later, back in the city, I can still hear it. A faint, rhythmic pulse in the back of my mind. Always there, always calling me back. The signal isn't done with me yet.
"6 months in the Smokies. 6 months. 6 whole months without touching a drop. I should have been proud, right? But sitting alone in this RV, deep in the Great Smoky Mountains, I didn't feel proud. I felt restless, empty. Even the kind of empty that creeps up on you, settling in your bones when there's nothing but the sound of your own thoughts bouncing around your skull. This trip was supposed to be a celebration, a gift to myself for staying clean. I thought the solitude would help me clear my head, maybe give me some perspective. The Smokies had always been a place of peace for me. My dad used to take me camping here when I was a kid, back when life was simple, before the bottle got its hooks into me. I pulled out my phone, flicking through pictures of those old trips. My thumb hesitated over the last photo of my dad and me standing by a roaring campfire. That was before everything went to hell, before the drinking became my escape from everything I couldn't face. The phone buzzed, pulling me back to the present. It was my brother Jake, checking in as usual. "Hey man," he said when I answered. "How's the trip? You hanging in there?" Jake was always the responsible one, clean-cut, married with kids, a steady job. He'd been my lifeline after the wreckage of my addiction. I owed him more than I could ever repay. "Yeah, it's good," I lied. "Just me and the trees, peaceful." "You staying out of trouble?" I chuckled. "I'm not exactly near any temptations out here," I said. I didn't tell him about the bottle I'd brought with me. It sat in the back of the RV, unopened, but still there, just in case. A cruel comfort. I'd stared at it more than once already, the amber liquid calling to me in the quiet. "Good to hear," Jake said, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. "Just keep your head straight, all right? I know it's tough being out there alone, but you got this. Call me if you need anything." "I will. Thanks." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the bed. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows through the trees. The sky faded from a soft orange to deep purple, and with it, the familiar sense of isolation began to settle in. The first night in the Smokies should have been serene, but as soon as the darkness took over, I felt it, the unease. The forest around me was too quiet. It was like it was holding its breath. No wind, no rustling leaves, just the faint crackle of my campfire outside. I sat at the picnic table near the fire, trying to relax, but the silence only seemed to grow heavier. I poked at the flames with a stick, hoping they'd somehow keep the stillness at bay. Then I heard it. A whistle. Faint at first, like a breeze cutting through the trees, but unmistakably human. I froze, listening. It was tuneless, just a single drawn-out note that seemed to float through the air. I scanned the tree line, but there was nothing. No movement. No one else was supposed to be this far out. I'd parked in a secluded area of the park, away from the main trails. The whistling continued, soft but constant. Probably just the wind, I muttered to myself. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't true. It didn't sound like wind. It sounded deliberate. I stood, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling, and slowly circled the fire. I kept the flames between me and the trees, my eyes darting between the dark shapes of the pines. The whistle came again, louder this time, closer. My heart hammered in my chest, the familiar anxiety clawing its way up my throat. "Who's there?" I called, my voice breaking the thick silence. No response, just another long, drawn-out whistle. I grabbed my flashlight from the RV and swept the beam through the trees. The light cut through the darkness, but all I saw were shadows. No footsteps, no crunch of leaves, just that damn whistling drifting through the trees like a ghost. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. It had to be nothing, right? Just a trick of the wind. The mountains could be strange like that, especially at night. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The bottle of whiskey in the back of the RV started to look more and more appealing, but I shoved that thought down. I wasn't here for that. Not this time. To clear my head, I went for a hike, following a trail that wound through the dense forest. The air was crisp, the smell of pine and damp earth filling my lungs. For a while it worked. I could almost forget about the night before. Almost. That's when I saw the first marking. It was carved into the bark of a tree, a rough, jagged symbol that looked like a spiral or maybe an eye. I couldn't tell. It didn't look natural, though. It felt intentional, like a warning. I ran my fingers over it, the grooves deep and uneven. I kept walking, but the further I went, the more of the symbols I saw. Spirals, faces, strange runes carved into trees, all leading deeper into the woods. It felt like they were guiding me somewhere, though I wasn't sure I wanted to find out where. That night, the whistling returned. I was sitting by the fire again, trying to keep my mind off the bottle, when the sound came drifting through the trees. This time, it wasn't soft. It was louder, closer. I stood up, flashlight in hand, and scanned the forest. My heart pounded in my ears. My mouth went dry. The whistling seemed to circle the campsite, moving slowly but deliberately. It was all I could hear, filling the silence like a haunting lullaby. I turned, and that's when I saw him. Standing just beyond the tree line was a figure. A man, gaunt and pale, his hollow eyes fixed on me. He stood motionless, his lips pursed as he whistled that same eerie, tuneless note. "Hey!" I called, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" The figure didn't respond. He just stood there, watching me. The whistling grew louder, more insistent, cutting through the night air like a knife. I took a step toward him, but as soon as I moved, he turned and disappeared into the trees. My hands were shaking. I wasn't sure if it was fear or something else, something deeper. I felt the urge to chase him, to follow that haunting sound, but my legs refused to move. I stayed by the fire until dawn, too scared to go back inside the RV. The next day, I tried to leave. I packed up my gear, grabbed the keys to the RV, and decided I'd had enough of the Smokies. But when I tried to start the engine, it wouldn't turn over. Just a dull click. I swore under my breath, popped the hood, and checked the battery. Everything looked fine, but the damn thing wouldn't start. I tried calling Jake, but my phone was dead. I'd charged it the night before, but now it was completely drained. No signal, No service, nothing. The forest around me felt suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting just beyond the trees. The whistling started again, faint at first, then growing louder, like a taunting melody. I grabbed the bottle from the back of the RV. I wasn't going to drink it, not yet. But holding it made me feel better, more in control, as if I could use it as a weapon somehow. That night, the stranger came back. I woke up to the sound of whistling, loud, sharp, right outside the RV. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked out the window. He was standing by the fire pit, his pale face illuminated by the flames. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, and that awful whistling filled the air, pressing in on me from all sides. He took a step toward the RV, and I felt the panic rise in my chest. I grabbed the bottle, holding it like a club, and stumbled outside. The air was freezing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whistling pierced through my skull, making it hard to think. I raised the bottle, ready to throw it. But then something stopped me. For the first time in days, I heard something else. A voice, faint but real. Jake's voice. "Nick, don't do it." I blinked, shaking my head. The stranger was gone. The whistling had stopped, and there in the silence, I realized what I had been about to do. The bottle slipped from my hands and shattered on the ground. I dropped to my knees, gasping for air, the weight of everything crashing down on me. The whistling was gone, but the fear, the isolation, it wasn't something I could run from. Not out here. Not anywhere. When the sun rose, I tried the RV again. This time, it started. I drove out of the Smokies that morning, not looking back. The whistling stayed behind, lost in the trees, but the memory of it, the temptation would stay with me. 6 months sober. But this trip taught me something I hadn't been ready to face. Some demons don't live in bottles. They live in the silence, in the spaces we create for ourselves when we're trying to hide from the world. I hadn't planned on staying at Stillwater Grove. The campground wasn't even marked on my map, just a small patch of green near the edge of Shawnee National Forest. But as I drove down the empty forest road, I saw the sign. Old, weathered wood with the words Stillwater Grove Campground carved into it. It felt like an invitation, one I couldn't resist. I'd been on the road for weeks, photographing wildlife for a personal project I'd picked up after quitting my job. The last few months had been a blur of long drives, lonely campsites, and an overwhelming need to be anywhere but back in the city. I didn't miss my corporate job or my ex. What I did miss was the feeling that I knew what the hell I was doing with my life. Stillwater Grove seemed perfect, quiet, isolated, and right by the lake. It would give me the break I needed, some peace before heading back into the real world. When I pulled into the campsite, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grove. The air was still, the only sound being the gentle lapping of water against the shore. A single RV sat on the far side of the campground, a distant figure moving near it. Otherwise, it was just me. I parked my RV near the edge of the lake, the water glistening under the fading light. After setting up camp, I grabbed my camera and headed toward the shore, hoping to catch the sunset. As I stood there, framing the perfect shot, a voice startled me. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I turned to see a woman standing a few feet away, her face half in shadow. She had an otherworldly kind of beauty, pale skin, long dark hair, and eyes that seemed to take in everything. "Yeah," I replied, lowering my camera. "It's peaceful." She smiled. "It always is here. I'm Ellie, by the way." "Nick," I said, shaking her outstretched hand. Her skin was cold, like she'd been standing in the shade for too long. "You camping here too?" "For a little while," she said, her voice soft. "I come here every now and then. Can't stay away." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, though I couldn't explain why. I wasn't used to talking to people much anymore. The solitude had become my comfort zone, and something about Ellie felt out of place. "You here for the fishing?" I asked, trying to make small talk. She shook her head. "No, just the lake. The quiet." We stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The sky turned shades of pink and orange, the water reflecting the colors like a mirror. I raised my camera, snapping a few shots, and when I looked back, Ellie was gone. just like that. I glanced around, but there was no sign of her. The other RV was still parked at the far end of the grove, but there was no movement. I chalked it up to her being quick on her feet, though it left me feeling oddly unsettled. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up, making the trees outside rustle against each other like whispered secrets. I rolled over in bed, trying to find a comfortable position, but something felt off. The RV was too cold, colder than it should have been. I checked the thermostat, but everything seemed normal. Still, the chill lingered. I grabbed a blanket and tried to force myself to sleep. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, barely audible at first, like a woman's voice carried on the wind. I sat up, listening, but it was gone. Just my imagination, I thought. Long days alone in the woods will do that to you. But then I heard it again. This time it was clearer, a soft, melodic humming coming from outside. I climbed out of bed, grabbing my flashlight. My breath fogged up in the cold air as I stepped outside the RV, scanning the campsite. Nothing, just the stillness of the lake and the trees swaying gently in the wind. But the humming persisted, coming from near the water's edge. I walked toward the shore, the beam of my flashlight dancing over the ground, and that's when I saw her. A woman in white, standing at the edge of the lake, her back to me. Her long, dark hair hung loose down her back, swaying slightly as she hummed that haunting tune. "Ellie?" I called out, my voice shaking. She didn't turn. She just stood there, motionless, her gaze fixed on the water. Something about the way she stood, so still, so rigid, set my nerves on edge. I took a step closer, the flashlight illuminating her pale figure, but as soon as the light touched her, she vanished. I blinked, stunned. 1 second, she'd been there. And the next, she was gone. The water rippled where she had been standing, but otherwise, the lake was empty. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was that? I hurried back to the RV, locking the door behind me. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps. My hands were shaking. I didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural nonsense, but what I'd seen, it wasn't right. I had seen her. I knew I had. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to rationalize what had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the image of that woman standing by the lake. The next morning, I found Ellie near the grove, sitting by a small campfire. She smiled when she saw me, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Rough night?" she asked, as if she already knew. "Yeah," I said, sitting down across from her. "I saw something last night. A woman by the lake. I thought it was you, but she wasn't there when you got close." Ellie finished, her voice calm, too calm. "The Lady of Stillwater." "The what?" I asked, feeling a chill run through me. Ellie looked at me, her eyes dark and hollow. "She's been here for a long time. Longer than the campground, longer than the trees. She drowned in the lake, or so the story goes. Some say she was waiting for someone. Her lover, I think, but he never showed." I stared at her, my stomach twisting. "You're telling me she's a ghost?" Ellie shrugged. "Call it what you want, but she's real, and now that you've seen her, she won't let you go." I laughed, though it came out shaky. "That's insane." "Is it?" Ellie asked, her gaze locking onto mine. "You saw her. You know she's real." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words died in my throat. I had seen her, and it hadn't been a trick of the light or my imagination. Something had been there, something that shouldn't have been. "What does she want?" I asked quietly. Ellie's eyes flicked toward the lake. She wants what she's always wanted, to take someone with her into the water. That night, the sound started again. At first, it was the soft humming, drifting through the night air. Then the splashing, gentle, rhythmic, like someone wading through the water. I lay in bed, my heart racing, my body tense. I didn't want to go outside. I didn't want to see her again. But the pull was stronger this time. A strange compulsion tugged at me, drawing me toward the lake. I tried to fight it, to stay in the RV, but my legs moved on their own, carrying me outside into the cold night air. The lake was calm, reflecting the pale moonlight. And there she was, standing in the water, her white dress billowing around her as if moved by an unseen current. "Come to me," she whispered, her voice soft but clear. "Please come." I took a step forward, my body moving against my will. The water lapped at my shoes, and I could feel the cold seeping into my skin. "Come with me," she said again, her voice almost pleading now. "I've waited so long." I fought to resist, to break free from whatever force was drawing me in, but my feet kept moving, the water now up to my knees, freezing cold. I could feel the pull of the lake, the weight of the water dragging me down. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me back with such force that I stumbled onto the shore. Ellie stood beside me, her face pale, her grip strong. "You have to leave," she said, her voice urgent now. "Before it's too late." I looked back at the lake, but the woman was gone. The water was still, as if nothing had happened. "What the hell is happening?" I gasped, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Ellie's expression was grim. "She's marked you now. If you stay, she'll take you. You have to go." I didn't argue. I packed up my things, my hands shaking, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Within minutes, I was back in the RV, starting the engine and pulling out of the campsite as fast as I could. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Ellie stood at the edge of the grove, watching me go, her face unreadable. And behind her, just barely visible in the mist, was the Lady of Stillwater, her pale eyes following me, waiting for me to return. I didn't look back again. My name's Brian Patel, and this happened to me in the National Forest in Oregon. I grew up in Portland and spent most weekends hiking the trails with my dad. After he passed away, I kept the tradition alive, even though the solitude wasn't quite the same. I wasn't the sentimental type, but being out there brought some quiet to my otherwise loud, chaotic life as an electrician. That particular weekend, and I'd planned a 2-day solo trek, something to clear my head and test out some new gear. I wasn't an ultralight fanatic or anything, but I liked keeping things minimal. Just me, the trail, and whatever nature threw at me. My route started at Timberline Lodge and cut through some backcountry trails that didn't see much traffic. It was early morning when I set out, a thermos of black coffee in one hand and a map in the other. The first few hours were uneventful. The trails were damp from rain earlier in the week, and the scent of pine mixed with the occasional waft of mushrooms kept things pleasant. Around noon, I passed an older couple hiking with trekking poles. They waved but didn't stop to chat, which was fine by me. Solitude was the point. It was late afternoon when I noticed the first odd thing. I'd stopped at a clearing to refill my water from a nearby creek. The silence was too perfect. No birds, no rustling, nothing. It wasn't unusual for animals to scatter when a human came stomping through, but this was eerie, like the forest was holding its breath. I joked to myself that maybe I'd finally reached that perfect peace people were always yapping about in self-help books. As I climbed higher into the denser part of the forest, the feeling lingered. Every so often, I'd hear a snapping twig or see a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye, but I chalked it up to squirrels or deer. That changed when I reached the ridge. There was a campsite up there, or at least what was left of one. A collapsed tent lay flattened against the dirt, its poles bent at odd angles. Gear was scattered around like someone had emptied a backpack in a panic. What caught my attention was the cooler, one of those sturdy, bear-resistant kinds. Its lid was wrenched open, and deep claw marks gouged the plastic. I didn't recognize the pattern. It didn't look like bear claws. Whatever did it had talons. I poked around cautiously. A jacket with a name tag, Franklin, hung on a low branch, ripped down the middle like someone had tried to peel it off. That's when I saw the blood. Not a lot, but enough to know something had gone wrong. My stomach tightened. I didn't consider myself squeamish, but the combination of the silence and the blood made the air feel heavier, like it was pressing down on me. I didn't linger. I wasn't about to play hero and investigate further, but I also didn't want to turn back the way I'd come. The campsite had a bad vibe, and if someone was injured, I wasn't eager to meet whatever or whoever had caused it. I decided to push forward toward a secondary trailhead about 5 miles out. It wasn't on my original route, but it would get me out of there quicker. The trail narrowed as I descended into a gully. Thick undergrowth swallowed most of the light, and the temperature seemed to drop. My boots squelched in the damp earth as I pushed past ferns that slapped against my legs. About halfway down, I caught a foul odor, like rotting meat mixed with damp fur. My first thought was a dead animal, maybe a cougar kill left to rot, but it was strong enough to make my eyes water. Then I heard it, a low, deep rumbling noise that didn't sound natural. It wasn't a growl, but it wasn't mechanical either. It reverberated through the trees, making it impossible to pinpoint the direction. My fight or flight instincts kicked in, and I chose the third option, freeze. I crouched low, scanning the trees, my heart hammering in my chest. The noise came again, closer this time, followed by the crunch of heavy footsteps. I forced myself to move, creeping forward as quietly as possible. The trail curved ahead, and just as I rounded the bend, I saw it, or at least part of it. A massive, hulking shape loomed through the trees, crouched over something on the ground. Its limbs were grotesquely long, the joints bending in ways that didn't make sense. It had patches of wiry fur mottled with bare, pale skin. What struck me most was its posture, like a predator that had evolved to ambush. I stayed hidden behind a tree, trying not to breathe. Whatever it was feeding, its movements jerky and almost insect-like. The thing was tearing into something unrecognizable, its talons slicing through flesh with surgical precision. My stomach churned, and I fought the urge to retch. The smell was overwhelming. A sudden snap of a branch underfoot betrayed me. The creature's head shot up, swiveling unnaturally as it scanned for the source of the noise. I didn't get a clear view of its face, but I did see its teeth, rows of uneven serrated spikes that looked like they belonged in a shark, not on land. I bolted. Stealth be damned, I sprinted down the trail, branches clawing at my face and arms. The sound of pursuit was immediate, heavy footfalls crashing through the undergrowth. I didn't dare look back. My pack jostled against my shoulders as I weaved through the narrow trail, adrenaline pushing me faster than I thought possible. The trail forked ahead, and I veered left without thinking. Bad move. The path led to a dead end, a sheer drop-off into a ravine. My options were limited. Jump and risk breaking something, or turn and face the thing head-on. Neither seemed appealing. I scrambled up a boulder, hoping to gain some height and buy myself time. The creature burst through the trees moments later, its gangly frame silhouetted against the dim light. Up close, it was worse. Its skin was stretched too tight over its bones, and its movements were unnervingly smooth, like it was gliding rather than walking. It paused, tilting its head as if deciding whether I was worth the effort. I fumbled for the small knife in my pocket, knowing it was more symbolic than anything. The creature lunged forward, and I did the only thing I could. I threw my pack at it. The motion startled it, and it recoiled briefly, giving me enough time to leap down the side of the ravine. I tumbled hard, dirt and rocks tearing at my clothes as I slid to the bottom. My ankle twisted painfully, but I managed to scramble to my feet. The creature didn't follow immediately, but I could hear it pacing above, its claws scraping against the rocks as it searched for another way down. I limped through the ravine, following the trickle of water downstream. My only thought was to keep moving, to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing. The ravine eventually opened up into a clearing, and I spotted a ranger's cabin in the distance. Relief surged through me, though it was tempered by the realization that I wasn't out of the woods yet, literally or figuratively. The cabin was locked, but I found an axe leaning against the woodpile. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I crouched low, gripping the axe and scanning the tree line. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, every rustle of leaves setting my nerves on edge. When it came, it was sudden. The creature barreled into the clearing, moving faster than seemed possible for its lanky frame. I swung the axe as it charged, catching it in the shoulder. The impact staggered it, but the thing didn't go down. It lashed out with its talons, grazing my arm and drawing blood. We circled each other, predator and prey, roles blurring. I swung again, aiming for its head this time. The blade connected with a sickening crunch, and the creature let out a piercing screech. It collapsed, twitching violently before going still. I didn't stick around to admire my handiwork. With my arm bleeding and my ankle screaming in pain, I limped back toward the trailhead, keeping an eye on the shadows. I flagged down the first car I saw, a bewildered couple who probably thought I'd lost my mind. Years later, I avoid Mount Hood. Not because I'm scared, but because I've learned to stick to places where nature follows the rules, or at least pretends to. I'm going to be honest with you. Being a cop in a small town isn't glamorous. It's not like the movies where every day is a shootout or a high-speed chase. It's mostly handling neighbor disputes over where someone's fence ends or someone's dog barking too much. My name's Lucas Giroux, and I've been wearing the badge for 9 years here in Chesterville, Louisiana. Population about 2,000, give or take. I love this town. It's quiet, peaceful for the most part, and I like that. My days are usually filled with mundane tasks, which suits me just fine. I didn't sign up to be some action hero, but that was before what happened in 2014. That night, everything changed. Chesterville sits on the edge of Lake Vere, a slow-moving body of water surrounded by cypress trees and swampland. People here fish, drink, and go about their lives. It was a pretty uneventful Thursday evening. I was sitting in the patrol car near the lake, enjoying the last of my coffee. That's when the call came through. Domestic disturbance, 14 miles out of town, near the edge of the bayou. Some old shack out there. Probably a drunk couple having a fight. I sighed, thinking about how cold my coffee was going to get by the time I got back. I could have ignored the call. In a town this small, people mostly resolve their issues on their own. But it's my job, and I'm not the kind of guy to leave a job half done. So I punched the gas and headed toward the edge of the swamp, the smell of rotting vegetation creeping into the car through the vents. The air always smells different out there. Heavy, like something's growing in the darkness. The address was off the main road, way off. I had to take a gravel path that was barely wide enough for my cruiser, with branches scraping against the sides like they were trying to keep me from going any further. The place was almost hidden behind thick trees, vines practically choking the building itself. It was an old, decaying wooden structure, more of a cabin than a house. When I stepped out of the car, everything felt wrong. The hair on the back of my neck prickled, but I shook it off. Maybe I was just on edge because it was so quiet. And in a town where quiet usually means safety, this felt different, like something was waiting. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. That's when I heard it, a scraping noise from inside, something heavy being dragged across the floor. I called out, "Chesterville PD, anyone home?" Still nothing. Now, I've dealt with drunks, domestic fights, and all sorts of noise complaints, but the sound coming from inside wasn't something I'd heard before. My hand instinctively went to my gun as I tried the doorknob. Locked. I circled the cabin, looking for another way in, when I noticed something strange, a set of footprints leading around the back. But not human ones. These prints were larger, clawed, like some kind of animal. But whatever made them was walking on 2 legs, and they were fresh. I was starting to think this wasn't just some domestic dispute. I followed the prints, feeling a chill in the pit of my stomach. As I reached the back of the cabin, I saw the door was ajar, hanging on its hinges. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell, like rotting meat mixed with damp earth. The cabin was small, just one room, with a dirty mattress on the floor and a table covered in old newspapers. But what caught my eye was the blood. It was smeared across the floor, thick and dark, leading to a corner where something was slumped. I shone the flashlight on it. It was a man, or what was left of him. His body had been torn apart, like he'd been mauled by something much bigger than any animal I'd ever seen in these parts. His chest was ripped open, ribs exposed, and his face, well, there wasn't much left to recognize. I barely had time to process the scene when I heard that same dragging noise again, but closer this time, coming from behind me. I turned, heart racing, and shone the light toward the sound. Something was moving in the shadows, something big. At first I thought it was a bear, but bears don't move like that, and they sure as hell don't stand on two legs. It stepped into the light and I froze. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, with matted fur and a face that looked almost human, but twisted, distorted, like something halfway between a person and a wolf. Its claws were long, too long for anything natural, and its mouth was smeared with blood, teeth glistening like knives. I didn't hesitate. I drew my gun and fired, emptying the magazine into the thing's chest. But it barely flinched. The bullets hit, sure, but they didn't seem to do much more than piss it off. It let out this low sound, like it was irritated more than hurt, and took a step toward me. I backed up, reloading as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. I've never been a great shot, but at this range, it didn't seem to matter. Nothing was going to stop this thing. It lunged. I dove out of the way, crashing into a shelf that sent bottles and cans scattering across the floor. My head was spinning, but I managed to scramble to my feet and run for the door. I don't know how, but I made it back to the car, slamming the door shut just as it slammed into the side of the cruiser, rocking it on its wheels. I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning in the mud as I gunned it back down the gravel path. The thing didn't follow me. It just stood there in the rearview mirror, watching. As I sped away, its shape slowly faded into the darkness of the swamp. When I finally reached the main road, I stopped, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I had to call it in. But what the hell was I gonna say? That some kind of monster tore a man apart and nearly killed me? I thought about it for a long moment, staring at the radio, before deciding to do something I never thought I'd do. I lied. When I called it in, I said I found the man already dead. Looked like some kind of animal attack. Maybe a bear, maybe a wild dog. Hell, maybe both. I didn't mention the thing I saw. I couldn't. No one would believe me. I barely believed it myself. But here's the thing. I wasn't the only one out there that night. I found out later that 2 fishermen had been on the lake, close enough to the cabin to hear the gunshots. They saw something too. Something large, moving through the trees. They didn't get a good look at it, but they said it wasn't a bear. Wasn't anything they'd ever seen before. And they swore it walked on 2 legs. The next morning, I went back out there with the sheriff and a couple of deputies. We found the body, or what was left of it, but there was no sign of the creature. Just those same strange tracks leading off into the swamp. The sheriff wrote it up as an animal attack, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew something didn't add up. I've thought about that night a lot since then, about how close I came to ending up like that poor bastard in the cabin, and about what's still out there, lurking in the swamp. Some nights, when it's real quiet, I wonder if it's still watching. But I've learned not to go looking for answers. Sometimes, in a place like this, it's better to let the mysteries stay buried. The fog was thicker than I'd expected. I pulled my RV into a secluded clearing in Pisgah National Forest and stepped out into the damp air, the smell of wet earth heavy in my nose. Everything was muffled, as though the forest was holding its breath. The trees were shrouded in mist, their trunks fading into the gloom, and the trail I had heard so much about was hidden somewhere out there, waiting for me. I'd come here to find something unique. My vlog had been stagnating, and I needed a fresh angle. A fellow hiker had mentioned an unmarked trail, a path that didn't appear on any maps, one that locals said disappeared and reappeared as though it had a life of its own. Perfect. If I could document it and film the mystery, my audience would eat it up. I grabbed my camera and set it up, filming a quick introduction. Hey everyone, it's Nate here, and I'm in the middle of the misty Pisgah National Forest, about to track down the infamous Vanishing Trail. Legend says this path comes and goes, and people who wander too far down it don't come back. Let's see if that's true. I packed up my gear and set off into the fog. The forest was silent, the only sound my boots crunching on the damp leaves. I had a GPS in my pocket, just in case, but I didn't plan to use it unless things got really bad. I wanted to go off the grid, find this mysterious trail, and see if there was anything to the rumors. I'd always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and folklore were fun to tell around a campfire, but not much else. As I walked, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees. It clung to my skin, cold and heavy. It wasn't long before I found the first strange marker, a stone slab jutting from the ground, its surface covered in symbols, strange spiraling shapes that didn't look like any language I knew. I filmed it, talking into the camera as I described the find. This looks like something from an old burial ground, but there's no mention of this on any maps. Really makes you wonder what else is out here, hidden beneath the fog. I kept moving, the trees closing in tighter. The trail I was following became fainter, more overgrown, and soon it was little more than a game trail, barely wide enough to follow. I pushed forward, keeping my camera rolling. But after another hour of hiking, the trail simply disappeared. One moment, there had been a clear path, and now it was gone, swallowed by the forest. The mist curled around the trees, thick and almost suffocating. But I was certain I'd been on the right trail. I checked my GPS, but the signal flickered weakly. The screen showed that I was in the middle of nowhere. No path, no landmarks, just a blank screen with a blinking dot. Me, standing alone in the fog. "Okay," I muttered. "You've dealt with worse." I turned back the way I'd come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, the undergrowth denser. The fog was disorienting, and I had to rely on instinct to retrace my steps. The GPS was useless. I kept walking, scanning the ground for signs of the trail, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel uneasy. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not mine. I froze, listening. The sound came from deeper in the forest, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the leaves. I turned, scanning the fog, but there was nothing, just the swirling mist. Then, out of the gloom, a figure emerged. An older man, his clothes tattered and damp, his eyes wide and vacant. "Hey," I called, my voice echoing through the stillness. "You lost too?" The man looked at me for a moment, then shuffled forward. He seemed off. His clothes were torn, his face pale, and there was a distant look in his eyes, like he wasn't entirely there. "I've been walking for days," he said, his voice hoarse. "The trail, it keeps changing." "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping toward him. He shook his head. "No one's okay out here." I frowned, feeling a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "The trail, it moves. I've seen it, watched it disappear and reappear. It's not just a path, it's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave." I stared at him, my mind racing. This guy was either delirious or onto something. Either way, I didn't like the way he was talking. "Look," I said, pulling out my GPS. "We can find our way back." The man glanced at the GPS, then back at me. "It won't help. The forest is messing with it." I didn't believe him. I couldn't. I was a rational guy, and this was just a forest. I'd get us back to my RV, get him some help, and be done with it. But as we walked, things got stranger. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. The forest seemed to shift with every step. What had been an open path a moment ago was now choked with brambles. When I looked back, the trees seemed to loom closer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The man, whose name I learned was Eli, grew more agitated with every passing minute. "It's watching us," he muttered. "It knows we're here." "Who's watching?" I asked, growing impatient. "The forest," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's alive, and it's been here long before we were." I ignored him, focusing on the GPS, but even that was failing me. The screen flickered, the signal cutting in and out. At one point, it showed me standing on a clear path, but when I looked up, there was nothing but trees. Thick, twisted trees that looked like they had grown there for centuries. We kept walking, the fog growing thicker, pressing in on us. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and then the whispers started. Faint at first, like the wind through the leaves, but then more distinct voices calling out from the mist. "Nate?" I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Eli nodded, his eyes wide. "It's calling us, the forest." I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just the wind, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The voice had spoken my name. We came across a backpack tangled in the branches of a tree, high above our heads. It was old, covered in dirt and torn, but when I climbed up to retrieve it, I found fresh supplies inside, water, food, like someone had packed it yesterday. I felt a chill run down my spine. How had it gotten there? Eli was growing more paranoid, his eyes darting around as though he expected the trees to come alive at any moment. "We need to leave," he kept saying, "before it's too late." We pushed forward, but no matter which direction we went, we ended up back where we started. The fog seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, the whispers growing louder. Then, without warning, Eli was gone. I turned around, and he was just gone. The forest had swallowed him whole without a sound. I called out his name, but there was no response, only the dense mist pressing in on me. Panic set in. I was alone, lost in a forest that didn't want me to leave. The GPS was useless, and my camera was flickering, showing distorted footage of things I hadn't seen, shadows moving in the trees, figures lurking just out of sight. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees twisted and shifted around me, the fog so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, the forest closed in, trapping me in a maze of branches and brambles. The whispers were louder now, calling my name over and over. My camera caught glimpses of movement, dark figures moving through the mist, vanishing before I could focus on them. I didn't know what was real anymore. The forest seemed to warp around me, bending reality to its will. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog broke. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself back at my RV. The mist lingered at the edge of the forest, but it didn't follow. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw my gear into the RV, and drove off, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the forest a distant memory in the rearview mirror. Back home, I reviewed the footage. I expected to see the horror I'd witnessed, the proof of the vanishing trail and the strange shifting forest. But the videos showed nothing. The trail looked normal. The mist wasn't as thick, and Eli wasn't in the footage at all. It was like he'd never existed. I tried to tell myself it had been a bad trip, that my mind had played tricks on me, but deep down, I knew the truth. The forest had let me leave, but it hadn't forgotten me, and I had a feeling it was waiting, somewhere in the mist, for me to return.